Let's do a little meditation at the beginning to calm our minds, try to set a good motivation. Ladies, you're welcome to find a chair or sit on a cushion, depending on your feeling. So sit comfortably. Right from the beginning, see if you can try to develop a motivation for even entering into this initial meditation for the welfare of others. And bring your attention to your respiration. Use that to tie your attention to, letting other thoughts be unattended. Let them disappear from your mind, the other discursive thoughts that are inevitably arising. Try to bring your attention inward, bring it inward toward your heart, away from your eyes and your body. And following one breath down to your heart, again, watch your mind. One instant of mind being aware of what was present, just the immediately previous moment. Not getting involved in any of the particular thoughts, the objective thoughts. See their transparency. And focus on the continuity of the mind, its clear light nature. whatever thoughts passing through your mind, like clouds, are transient. Their very presence indicates the spaciousness of the mind. It's the fact that the mind reflects and rises in the aspect of whatever appears to it. Letting go again and again, let go of the sense of the body. Let go of the sense of an I, an observer, self. Ask yourself, what is the nature of the consciousness experiencing this? And if you get distracted to some thought, as though turning your back to that thought. Try to perceive the mind which is perceiving it, rather than focusing on the object of the thought. And try to think like this: since beginningless time, time without beginning, my mind stream has been circling within cyclic existence, as have the minds of all other beings that are still caught up in samsara, under the influence of self-grasping, the mind that seems to apprehend a truly existent self, a findable soul or atma. Under the influence of that erroneous mind, that ignorance, we've created negative karma, enhanced by the mind of self-cherishing. That once the I has been identified, wants it to be best, wants it to have, the I to have all pleasure, all victory. Cherishes it. And that which we consider our own, our loved ones, our family, our country, also involved in self-cherishing thought. This is our real enemy. These two demons self-grasping, self-cherishing thought. They've been our companions since beginningless time, and unless we cut their continuity, they'll remain with us. Even now, they prevent us from even having equanimity when suffering befalls us. We react with negativity and a sense of injustice, incredulity. All other living beings still caught in samsara, the rich, the famous, powerful, beautiful, those that are experiencing temporary high status, all of them are still under the influence of these minds. With a sense of empathy, identity with all other beings who share exactly that same aspiration to be happy, to be free of suffering, same aspiration that we have, who have been depthlessly kind to us over numberless lives. Recognizing their plight, wanting it to finish, and yet understanding the only way that we can do that we can bring that about, is ourself achieving enlightenment. Try to develop the special motivation for participating tonight in the class. I'm doing so not just for my own education, to be able to write books or be famous or whatever within cyclic existence. My primary motivation is to begin to make the steps toward my future enlightenment for the welfare of all beings, to become less a problem for them, to become actually beneficial. I'm going to listen to and participate in tonight's class for that purpose, in order to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. In fact, this motivation is what we, as hopeful bodhisattvas, try to develop for everything that we do, whatever we engage in. And bring your attention back to the present. Relax. So, how's everyone? Good meditation? How's your meditation? Was it? Unproductive? What did you say?
Well, I just went back to something more familiar that would keep you being quite as distracted with discursive thought.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Tried to make it productive.
Okay. I've been in some some courses where I was suggesting a meditation to do, and afterwards ask the people, and then some people said, no, I wasn't doing that meditation, I was doing some other meditation. So you can do what you want, I suppose. But it'd be nice to try to do along with this as much as you can, even though it's difficult sometimes. That's the purpose of getting familiar with this kind of meditation. So, any questions? Any things that you wanted to, yeah?
Could you teach us sometime the form of meditation that is called close placement of mindfulness on the feelings?
Yeah, I think so. Michael, do you need a chair or a cushion? Finding a couple cushions. Okay. Yeah, close placement of mindfulness. We can talk a little bit about that, because the meditation that we're doing now, in a sense, is a little bit similar to one of these meditations that Buddha taught that are very famous in the Theravada tradition. In Theravada it's called Satipatthana. Sati in Pali means mindfulness. Patthana means to place. In Tibetan we say Jampa Nershak. Have you heard of that before? Have you heard of the four close? I forgot your name. Bonnie. What Bonnie's talking about? Have you heard, Venerable? The four close placements of mindfulness. What are?
Feelings? Was the feelings you asked for? Yeah. And
She wanted feelings.
is there the one on the body, physical form?
Okay, there's four. So there's one on the body. What else? Do you know?
The breath?
The breath. Is that right? Now, usually like this, the Buddha taught that in order to get closer to developing single point of concentration, and in order to introduce oneself to the Four Noble Truths, that it was very skillful to take up these four kinds of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, mindfulness of the feelings, which doesn't mean, we'll learn as we study about the mental factors, it doesn't mean like emotions or something. It means the feelings of pleasure, pain, or indifference. Mindfulness of the consciousness, and mindfulness of phenomena. Right? Four objects that are taken to place the mind on, and they're said to introduce in a certain way to prepare one to understand the Four Noble Truths. And the close placement of mindfulness on the body is what we often do when we're doing the breathing meditation. It doesn't mean only watching the body. It means physical form. So it means all of the meditations involved in the watching of the breathing are under that category, close placement of mindfulness on the body. Also the walking meditations. You know what sometimes in meditation course, in some of the traditions, one walks and is mindful of every action, the foot rising from the ground and the heel touching and the sole touching the ground and moving of the leg. By being mindful of these various things, it's like that pole that you can tie the consciousness to, the wild elephant of your mind that keeps it from going to other thoughts. So successively it's engaging in more and more subtle things. The close placement of mindfulness on the feelings or sensations has to do with recognizing the arisal within your body and mind of pleasant and unpleasant, or just neutral states, and how they change, and how they themselves can be understood as the causes of our arising of afflictions. So it's related to the second noble truth, the source of suffering, the arisal of suffering. And the third one, mindfulness of the consciousness, It means it involves a little bit like what we're doing here when we watch the clear light nature of the mind, just watching that continuity of consciousness. The close placement of mindfulness on the on phenomena. One of the things, the main phenomena that one is mindful of is selflessness, of a permanent, the absence of a permanent partless self or something more subtle than that. In the Mahayana tradition, I think I remember asking one of my teachers, great Song Rinpoche, either I asked him or I remember him telling in some other context, that the reason in the Mahayana that we don't hear much about those meditations. Like if you go to a Theravada course, it's always about Satipatthana, right? Do you know what I'm saying, Bunny?
No, I just read it in Geshe Rapin's book.
Okay, you just read recently. So often if you go to a Theravada course, it's one of the main things that's talked about. Also in the Vietnamese tradition, Thich Nhat Hanh, even though it's sort of Mahayana, sort of an amalgam of Mahayana and the Theravada teachings, very much always mindfulness. When I asked her, I can't remember, or else Rinpoche was talking. So Rinpoche was talking about this. He said in the Mahayana, we don't take these four as our main objects of mindfulness. We take the Mahayana thought training as we're studying now in the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, always trying to be mindful of various methods to get us closer to developing this altruistic thought of enlightenment, bodhicitta. It's considered to be more karmically potent, more powerful. And that's what Rinpoche had said, that why you don't see so much analysis of that or emphasis in meditation in the Mahayana, especially as the Tibetan tradition, there was a lot of emphasis on Tantra, right? So where there is in the Tantrayana, even other objects of mindfulness on pure view, for instance. In Mahayana, more mindfulness on bodhicitta. In the Theravada, more mindfulness on the four close placements of mindfulness. Okay. How about in terms of our first class, or second class last time? First verses that we were talking about. Any questions as you were reading about that, or anything has come up? If you don't have questions, I may have questions for you. Okay. Everyone's happy? So the first 6 verses we talked about last time were kind of like a general introduction to the subject. Remember the bodhisattva, real bodhisattva is likened to a peacock. You ladies missed, you and Nicole missed last time. So the bodhisattva, the archetypal Mahayana saint, is likened to a peacock in that the peacock, in some kind of explanations, some scientists may say this is not literally true, but maybe there is some truth to this. The peacock owes its beauty to its ability to ingest poison, and not only survive it, to thrive on it, to become more brilliant on that which other animals would die from. One understanding is that it can survive in the area where the cobras are, because the peacocks do have the ability to kill cobras, like the mongoose and other things. And where if other animals were to live in that garden where the poisonous snakes were, they would succumb to that. This text doesn't mention so much about snakes. It talks about poison plants, poisons in a sort of poisonous garden that other animals would die if they lived. The peacock actually thrives there. So the bodhisattva, like that, can actually utilize in the higher practices of the Mahayana path, can actually utilize all of the outer and inner poisons of cyclic existence to enhance their own practice. Like we can kind of see superficially by seeing the outer situation, the suffering of others, and understanding their afflictions, incredible compassion can arise rather than anger and resentment and so forth. And by a certain, courageous mind and coupled with renunciation and bodhicitta, a sense of altruism for others, they're able even to utilize attachment that's in their own continuum that could destroy others if others were to engage in attachment. Right? So that was kind of one of the gists of what we talked about before, and also the fact that basically there are two main objects to be abandoned here, and from the Mahayana point of view. One of them is the self-grasping, remember? That is, do you remember what self-grasping was? Could you explain? I forgot, you remind me of your name, I was going to... Frank.
Self-grasping, as opposed to self-cherishing, self-grasping is the notion that there is an inherent I, as opposed to the opposite view, which would be that we're inherently empty.
We're inherently empty.
That our nature.
That's interesting. Maybe we would say, someone would immediately jump on you in the debating courtyard. They say, inherently empty. Actually, what we would probably be better off saying is empty of an inherent self. Is that inherently, because from a Buddhist perspective, nothing inherently exists, even emptiness. So if you said inherently empty, they might be able to jump on you. Although there would be some way you could defend yourself in about that. Yeah, I think you're right. Generally, self-grasping refers to the fundamental ignorance that is understood in Buddhism as the root cause of all our suffering. It's through that, the agency of that we create negative karma, and it is through its presence all the other afflictions, anger and attachment, the other kinds of 84,000 different afflictions arise in the mind due to that sense of ego. Not just the appearance of the ego. This mind is not just considering the appearance of the ego, because even someone who's eliminated self-grasping still has the appearance to their mind of a self until they reach Buddhahood. But they no longer grasp to that. That's why it's called self-grasping. Self-grasping means, like, say, for instance, seeing the mirage, and it appears as water to you, and believing in that, grasping to that as real as it appears, believing that it actually exists the way that it appears. So grasping to the self, that's self-grasping. Self-cherishing, do you remember, Thea, what self-cherishing is?
It's more like considering oneself more important than others, really cherishing this self that appears to be real.
Mm-hmm. So it, in a certain sense, it's an adjunct of that other mind. It's distinct. It's something different than self-grasping. Self-grasping is an ignorant mind, is one of the root afflictions that, to the appearance of a truly existent I, it's believing, it's grasping to that, as though there were something out there that it could find, or something back here, a real I, a real observer, a real taster, a real meditator. And self-cherishing is an attitude that arises once that sense of I has been instituted, that, because of familiarity over numberless lifetimes, wants that I to profit. It identifies with that I, and as a result, cherishes its happiness and its longevity and its importance. And it cherishes it as most important. Right? So that's, from a Mahayana point of view, the bodhisattvas, in a sense, even take that self-cherishing as their initial, more important object of negation. In the Hinayana path, in the followers of the Shravakas, the hearers, or the Pratyeka Buddhas, solitary realizers, they take mainly self-grasping as the object, their main object to be abandoned. In fact, they may be oblivious of the existence of self-cherishing, unless they happen to have had the fortune of hearing some Mahayana discourses of the Buddha. So they're mainly concerned with trying to get rid of the self-grasping and achieve nirvana. The bodhisattvas are taking mainly the self-cherishing as their first obstacle, because it's through the agency of that that they can enter into the Mahayana path. And along the way, eliminate self-grasping. But without having eliminated self-cherishing thought, there's no way to eradicate from the mind the subtle stains that prevent omniscience. Without eliminating self-cherishing thought, all one can do is eliminate the self-grasping. One can attain nirvana, and eventually one has to eliminate the self-cherishing also to attain a further state of omniscience, of Buddhahood. Ms. Swirl.
I don't understand how you could have self-cherishing if you didn't. I mean, it seems if you eliminated self-grasping, you wouldn't be able to be self-cherishing because you wouldn't have the idea of a self to cherish.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So it seems like
I think I know what you mean.
it seems like that would work.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're coming about it from a very scientific perspective, right? The physicist. So, here's a question for you. Do you recognize that there's a difference between the achievement of the Hinayana path and the Mahayana path? This is clear. The person who achieves nirvana, the arhat, have they eliminated self-grasping?
I don't know if this is a question I'm qualified to answer.
You may not be qualified. You may not be qualified to answer, but I'm asking anyway.
Well, I mean, what I've heard is that the whole idea.
I'm just teasing.
The distinction between Hinayana and the Mahayana is that when you're in the Hinayana path and you become enlightened, it's just for yourself. You say, okay, I'm going to be happy and be in nirvana.
Right. Well, you said when you attain enlightenment. So that term is used sometimes there's the term the hearer's enlightenment, the solitary realizer's enlightenment, but that refers to their achievement of not full Buddhahood, of their own goal of nirvana. Okay. So when they achieve that, do they get rid of self-grasping?
I have no idea.
They do.
First Bhumi Arhat, right?
Pardon?
There would be a first Bhumi Arhat at that point.
First Bhumi Arhat. Usually we use the word first Bhumi, the Bhumis. Generally, those are referring to the stages of the Mahayana Arya beings, those who've realized emptiness directly.
So there's not any cross-correlation on it?
There's some correlation, but you have to investigate much more. It's not. I don't think it's like that. The person who's attained nirvana definitely has eliminated self-grasping. That is because they've ceased, they've achieved the truth of cessation, which is the cessation of suffering and the cause of suffering. You might say, well, I read in the sutras that some arhats were beaten to death and humiliated. How could you say they ceased suffering? Their mind is completely at bliss, whatever is occurring to them. There might be some residue of past karma that they experience, but they've reached a state of mental tranquility and bliss that's called nirvana. The way that they've done that is by not associating with the I, not believing that self-grasping any longer, by enhancing the antidote, the wisdom that realizes how the I actually exists, that the I is empty. So they've definitely eliminated self-grasping. However, that ignorance, right? However, they still have self-cherishing thought, the arhats. It's kind of like the example I gave before was the classic example. If you have a box that you've kept sandalwood sticks in, and you take out the sandalwood incense or dust, and you take it all out and you shake it out, the box, you take a cloth, you clean it out, if you smell that container, it would still have an odor of sandalwood. Maybe sandalwood's too good to use for self-cherishing thought. Say camphor, or something. Naphthalene, maybe better. That's a good example today, right? The naphthalene of self-cherishing thought. So even you take the mothballs out of the woolen chest, there's still the odor of that, right? That permeates that is a residue of that. So it said even when you've eliminated the self-cherishing thought, like the arhat has, if you had not had a particular method to eliminate the self-cherishing, even though the arhat knows fully well that there is no self, they still recognize there is a conventional self. There's a conventional swirl, there's a conventional Dan, there's a conventional Oma, there's a conventional Nicole. They know these things exist conventionally. They know they're ultimately empty, but they still, because of that habit energy, that imprint of cherishing the self before, they still work for their own nirvana.
So you're kind of saying like self-cherishing is the total absence of bodhicitta. Like if you don't have any bodhicitta, like they're like opposite.
No, not exactly. It's the main impediment to developing bodhicitta, but even when one develops bodhicitta, there may be something similar, something a little bit, some residue of something like self-cherishing, even up till higher stages. But in general, it's that self-cherishing is what prevents us from developing the Mahayana attitude of working for others. Yeah. It's kind of like even though the arhat, even though a person had wisdom and they understood the self didn't really exist, they might still work for their own welfare. That's kind of inertia of previous familiarity with cherishing the self. So the Mahayana practitioner, the bodhisattva, takes that as their principal object to be abandoned at first, in order to be able to eliminate all the stains from the mind, okay, to enter into the Mahayana path. Oma.
Is part of that because they still see themselves as separate from other people and do not identify themselves with other people?
Certainly that's a result of not eliminating, because the Buddhas have eliminated all kinds of dualistic perception. They still see in a conventional sense, they know that they're different, their mind stream is different conventionally than others' mind streams, but they don't hold any favoritism or partiality between sentient beings or their own welfare and other sentient beings' welfare. Probably there's some separation, but the bodhisattva still recognizes a difference of, the separate nature of themselves and others. They don't sort of just walk around in a cloud and everything is the same, baby. They do see a difference of things.
But there is a connectedness there.
The attitude that brings about bodhicitta, which helps to overcome self-cherishing, is an attitude that begins to turn outwards, and that we have some little inkling of. We obviously have some altruism. We have compassion. We don't have it to the extent that great saintly beings do, or that the bodhisattvas do, because they have seen very clearly the disadvantages of cherishing the self. And they've seen the advantages of cherishing others. And they've utilized particular procedures to overcome the cherishing of the self and to enhance the cherishing of others. That's what we're talking about. Okay, so let's continue along. The first 6 verses sort of were a general introduction. Now the 7th verse, we start to get into 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. We get into another level of sophistication here. In the version that we're using, Geshe Sopa's text. This is not translated by Geshe, so there still may be the scholars who helped him translate, there still may be some question we can raise. 7th verse says, the ego clinging of the helpless wanderer in cyclic existence is the messenger of the devil.
What's up with that?
I guess you didn't have a chance to read the comments here. Okay, so. Distance yourself from the savor of selfishness and hedonism and willingly embrace hardship for the sake of others. So if we had, if people were already familiar with Tibetan, which we're not, I could sort of explain a little bit about how this verse is translated. And I'll just mention the thing, ego clinging is what we're calling self-grasping. Okay? So the text, literally it says something like, it says, Dani, it means now, Rangwang meba koai taktu zimba dugi ponya di. The thing they're calling messenger here is what we see sometimes in tantric teachings also, when we talk about messenger dakinis and so forth. Ponya means also envoy. The way that they've taken it here, and the way that some other lamas have taken it, is that there are two objects of this sentence. There is the ego grasping of the person who is without power. Rangwang meba means, not under our own, we're not free. We're wandering in cyclic existence without freedom. We might think that we're free, especially if we got some money in the bank, we've got good looks or some smarts. I think, I'm free. Actually, we're completely under the influence of our karma and our past karma that's ripening and our afflictions that come up again and again. So that's kind of the meaning of the helpless wanderer, the one without independence. Rangwang means independent. Here it says Rangwang meba means without independence, helpless. We're circling in samsara. And the way the sentence goes, it looks as though it's saying this ego grasping or ego clinging is the messenger of the devil. Actually, the word devil here is what we call Mara. You know Mara? I don't mean your friend Mara. I think one of the first crushes I had in high school was some pretty Lithuanian girl named Mara Tess. If you're out there, Mara. It's not talking about some girl named Mara. Mara is an Indian word that means, it could be translated as devil. Have you heard of the Mara before? Have you heard, Don?
That's what the Buddha was attacked by.
Well, there are different kinds of Maras. Do you know, when we talk about the Maras, how many Maras are there?
84,000?
Okay, so get your pencil out. There are four main kinds of Maras. Okay, we'll subsume them, yeah. I think I've told you this story before. Once Geshe Darge was teaching in Dharamsala about he said, and now there are 84,000 delusions. And people sort of looked around and went, they got sharpened up their pencils. And Geshe says the first is ignorance, the second is attachment, the third is hatred. And then all the rest can be subsumed under those three root delusions. And I think there was supposed to be an audible sigh in the room at that time. Phew. So I wasn't going to go through the list of 84,000 delusions. So there are four kinds of Maras. Do you know what they are? Anyone? Who said there were four Maras? Do you know?
The 5 aggregates?
The aggregates, the Mara of the aggregates, the Mara of death,
Desire.
the Mara of desire, you say? Yeah. What did you say? The aggregates, death, desire. Okay, maybe not exactly that. But and then, what was the thing that under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha, the most graphic? He was accosted by the son of the gods, Laibu, they say in Tibetan, Devaputra Mara. Devaputra Mara means one of the one of the gods of the desire realm, there is sort of like the cause of a lot of people's afflictions. Maybe like mischievous, not just spirits, but the head of the most, well, it's sort of like Cupid, you know, like we have this what do we call it, myth of Cupid sending the arrow down and suddenly you're struck with passion. And then we talk about different kinds of maras that bring forgetfulness and craziness and things like that, you know what I'm talking about. So the Devaputra Mara, the fourth Mara here in that list, you could put it in any order, it doesn't mean they have to be in that order, is one that's kind of the head of all of the different outer influences that can affect us. The other three Maras are all internal, so or associated with our continuum. The Mara of the aggregates, simply having contaminated aggregates is a demon, is something that is a problem for us. It's susceptible to disintegration and sickness and so forth, and pain. The Mara of the Lord of Death means that that death comes to everyone, and that there, in a sense, there is actually a living being called the Lord of Death. Did you know that, or did you think for sure there was? Yama.
Some sort of more mythological, you know, you sort of imagine the Lord of Death and sort of graphic for you.
Right. Sometimes we might think that it's that, but they're actually said to be one of the pretas is like the principal envoy of death that sort of is called the Lord of Death. And so here it's when it's talking about one of our maras, the maras that afflict us are not just the outer maras, you know, the outer spirits epitomized by the Devaputra Mara, the son of the gods, but also our aggregates are kind of like a burden for us, a demon, a devil. And death itself, our own inevitable demise, is a Mara. And the other one is called the Mara of the afflictions, Nyomo, the klesha. So not just desire, but all the afflictions, which includes self-grasping. That's the principle of those, isn't it? So that, in a sense, that's, if you talk about Mara, or here, what did it call, devil? That is, in a sense, I could say that might be the principal Mara is our own self-grasping. Now here, the way that these authors have taken, these translators have taken it, and Geshe was kind of reading it just literally, it looks like it's saying ego-grasping is the messenger of Mara. There are two different things talked about here, Mara and the messenger of Mara, or the envoy of Mara. In one sense, the way that Geshe is taking it is that Mara is the self-cherishing thought, and self-grasping is the envoy of that. But other lamas, Geshe Nawandarge and others, take it slightly differently. You can read it another way. It's almost as though more fundamental is just as what we were talking when Squirrel was asking our question. Joking. Was that self-grasping is like the principal Mara, in a sense. And self-cherishing is its envoy or herald. You know what a herald is? Someone who comes before the king and heralds, you know, the queen, and says, the king is coming, clean up the street, get your act together. So you could take it either way, I think. But basically it's talking about two things. It's talking about ego-grasping of ourselves who are without independence in cyclic existence, and recognizing one of them, ego-grasping, as either the devil itself, the main Mara, and self-cherishing thought as its envoy, that which sort of brings about our attention to self-grasping. Or you could think of self-grasping as the attendant or the messenger of self-grasping as the messenger of self-cherishing. I think it works either way. Basically, well, because they are interdependent. For instance, sometimes self-cherishing may be a little bit subdued. You're not thinking so much of yourself, but because ego grasping is getting very strong, you perceive the sense of ego, and as a condition, due to that condition, the seed already there of self-cherishing has a chance to rise. So sometimes self-grasping can be the condition that gives rise to self-cherishing. Other times, because of our selfishness, our self-cherishing, wanting ourself to always be first and to win and not to suffer, that can enhance our sense of ego at that point. So they're not independent. They're interdependent. So it depends on the situation. One might be dominant, and one might be like the devil, and one might be its envoy or messenger in different circumstances. Here, Geshe-la has taken it, reading it, the ego clinging or the ego grasping of the helpless wanderer in cyclic existence is the messenger of the devil. So here it's taken self-cherishing as the devil. In the Geshe Darge's text, when he taught it, and this is the translation is based on his commentary, he says, the text says, uncontrollable wandering through rounds of existence is caused by our grasping at egos as real. This ignorant attitude heralds the demon of self-concern for our welfare alone. So there it takes the demon or the Mara as self-cherishing. Okay, so the different, you can take it both ways.
What's the fourth one after aggregates, death, and afflictions? What was the fourth Mara?
The Mara of the son of the gods, Devaputra Mara.
So that actually
That's the only Mara that's really external one. Like when Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, and it said that during the evening, before he took the aspect of attaining enlightenment, he overcame the Maras. So sometimes the paintings, there are all these dragons, and demons are throwing weapons at him. And did you see Bertolucci's movie, The Little Buddha? And sort of like, all of these, the legions of troops coming and shooting arrows, and through his meditation, he was able to not be affected by that. That is kind of talking about both the outer and inner Maras. Some of them were like the legions of the son of the gods, Devaputra. And also, when that didn't scare the Buddha, then they appeared as beguiling, siren-like young ladies. I won't do my Hawaiian thing. Like the sirens that what's the word? Enchanted Ulysses and the soldiers and so forth. And there's a relationship between the outer Maras and the inner Maras. The main inner Maras are the delusions, the kleshas, one of the four Maras, right? So sometimes we might think, I'm being afflicted by so many outer spirits or Maras. The Maras are attacking me. It can be just your own. Other people can be sitting there and experience the same thing that you're experiencing, outer conditions, and not be afflicted. So that's a sign that you're being afflicted by the inner Maras. Even though we're afflicted a little bit by outer spirits, the main thing is our reaction to that, how we react to that. If you know people that are possibly afflicted by various kinds of Maras, inner or outer Maras, maybe they might be out. It seems like there might be some spirit influence or some kind of inner Maras. People losing control as though they don't have control of their mind any longer. The main ways to overcome that are the antidotes to these two demons. Depends on which you call the demon and which you call the attendant. That is, what's the main antidote of self-grasping? Is it compassion? The emptiness? wisdom of emptiness. Yeah. My teacher allowed me, this is important, this may be a question on the exam now. Is emptiness something very holy and special that we pray, oh, emptiness, so wonderful? Actually, my teacher, Lamiyesh, used to say, emptiness, nothing special. Even caca has emptiness. It's the nature of everything, right? Emptiness, the ultimate nature of all phenomena. What is special and sublime is the wisdom that realizes that's the nature of all phenomena. That is special. Okay? So the antidote to self-grasping, that ignorance that believes in the I and causes us so much problem, tightness in the middle of our chest, the antidote to that is the wisdom that realizes the spaciousness of everything, the openness, the emptiness of especially that I that seems to be there, but is actually empty of something we're attributing to it, a certain existence that seems to be findable there. What's the antidote to self-cherishing? In a sense, bodhicitta, great compassion, bodhicitta, the method side. One side, the wisdom is the antidote to the self-grasping, and the method side, all of the skillful means, upaya, the ultimate method here in the sutra path being bodhicitta, is the antidote to self-cherishing. The mind that would work for others and take the defeat and give the victory to others. So for instance, if one is being afflicted by outer maras or inner maras, the best solution is to try to cultivate those two, what we call the two bodhicittas. Remember at the beginning of the course we said this sort of the aim of the mind training, this lojong kind of literature, was a special method to enhance the development of the two bodhicittas. Conventional bodhicitta, meaning, as Elaine was saying, the conventional bodhicitta, meaning loving compassion, the altruistic wish to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of others. Ultimate bodhicitta is what? Do you remember? Do you remember, Diane? So an arhat, a Hinayana arhat has ultimate bodhicitta.
Isn't it when you don't ever have to think about it anymore and you just like totally have bodhicitta all the time?
No. In terms of Diane's answer, she said, I asked, what's ultimate bodhicitta? And she said, it's the wisdom that realizes emptiness. And I said, therefore the arhat would have ultimate bodhicitta.
It's while under the influence of bodhicitta.
By a mind within,
Perception of emptiness under the influence of bodhicitta.
held by, or within the continuum of someone who has developed conventional bodhicitta, the realization of emptiness. In that continuum is called ultimate bodhicitta. The realization of emptiness in the continuum of mind stream that's not held by bodhicitta is not called ultimate bodhicitta. That realization of emptiness is just realization of emptiness. So sometimes when we were in the mountains in Nepal, near our monastery in Laudo, where Lama Zopa Rinpoche meditated in his previous life and built a monastery, having promised to do so in his last life, sometimes they're really very strong. Sometimes really feel, when you go to sleep at night, you feel like some pressure pushing down, like some spirit trying to control you. And if you get afraid, it's as though the spirit takes that much longer, like sort of savors that, relishes that, kind of gets off on that, your fear and so forth. The quickest way to get rid of that is by meditating on these two minds. First of all, letting go of your ego, meditating on the emptiness of the ego, because the ego is what's causing the fear, and the ego is what's identifying with this body, the sense that there's something else out there and so forth. So meditating on that is one of the antidotes. The other antidote is meditating on compassion, thinking, oh, this poor spirit, I've created some negative karma with respect to it in the past. Here they are suffering, trying to hurt me. And I hope they'll remain and maybe I'll be able to help them. With that kind of compassionate attitude, the spirits usually, they leave immediately. It's like, oh gosh, this is boring. Do you follow what I mean? It's like when you're kids. I remember one of the great traumas of my youth was having my uncles, who were just a couple years older than I am. We used to go to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and we went out to we used to go to some army surplus store. We used to walk, and one time, I must have been about 10 or 9, I sat down at one point in the store, and then I felt something give, and I looked around, and I had sat on one of these explorer hats, these kind of African hats. It was kind of made out of cardboard, and I'd crushed it, and I had to buy it. It's like $3, And I was so, upset. I didn't have very much. A kid, what do you get, a 25 cents allowance or something, so that was a lot, months of allowance. And they were razzing me for days and days. And I remember going to my mom and crying, and she said, the more you react to their teasing, the more they're going to be interested in teasing you. I think maybe my mom was Tara, I don't know. She was getting me ready for these kind of teachings. And she said, if you kind of, when they tease you, if you kind of laugh along with them and say, yeah, wasn't that a hoot? They'll be uninterested, it'll go away. And in fact, I tried that, and the first time that happened, then, okay, no more fun to tease him about that. It's a little bit similar with the spirits, that the outer, the Devaputra Maras, the different kinds. They might be Pretas, they might be Nagas, other kind of things. If you have compassion for them, rather than reacting with fear, resentment, depression, and grasping, if you react with compassion for them, sometimes they don't even like that. They leave. There's one of the great Tibetan saints, Tibetan meditators, Geshe Kanglumpa, the crying Geshe. I might have mentioned Geshe Kanglumpa before, do you remember? Geshe Kanglumba's reincarnation is living in Wisconsin now. And so Geshe Kanglumpa, in one of his previous lives, at the time of the Kadampa Geshis, he was called the crying Geshe, because whenever spirits would come to afflict him, and instead of trying to do some wrathful action to get rid of them, or doing protection circles or mantras or something, he meditated on compassion and would cry, thinking how they were suffering, these spirits were suffering. And it's said that on one occasion, I think it's one of the stories in the Lanrim lineage lamas, talked about how the spirits, having encountered this, had a meeting and said, okay, this is ridiculous, let's leave. This guy has got compassion for us. We're not going to get any kind of pleasure here. So when we would meditate, when we would do that, when we were in Laudo, and we would meditate on either emptiness, selflessness, or on compassion, usually spirit would go right away. Even more effect is if you can unify the two, as in Tantra, say for instance, visualizing yourself as Avalokiteshvara, both out of emptiness, arising as a compassionate appearance for the welfare of others. There's nothing for the spirit to get interested in then, and either if they do remain, they benefit and they won't harm you, and if otherwise they leave very quickly. So anyway, those are the 4 kinds of maras. Here, to me, it makes, just looking at it, it makes more sense to think of the principal mara, meaning the self-grasping, and its messenger, its attendant, meaning the self-cherishing, although you can read it both ways. So it says, the ego clinging of the helpless wanderer in cyclic existence is the messenger of the Mara, messenger of Mara, messenger of the devil. Distance yourself from the savor of selfishness and hedonism, and willingly embrace hardship for the sake of others. So basically, this is talking about the meditation that's meant to be one of the principal antidotes throughout the text, which is called Tonglen. Do you remember Tonglen? Tongwa means giving, Lenpa means taking. Distance yourself from the savor of selfishness and hedonism. Here, selfishness is one's own desires, rangdu in Tibetan. And hedonism is the way they've translated it as kidu, desiring happiness, sort of like that. Desiring, one's own desires and desiring happiness. They call it hedonism. That's kind of nice. And so when it says distance yourself, you could say free yourself from them. Separate yourself from these coarser thoughts of your own happiness and your own wishes. That you should make all the ultimate choices and decide everything. By separating yourself from them, instead, that is, separate yourself from self-cherishing thought, and instead, for the welfare of others, for the sake of others, you should willingly undertake what is hard. Kache, here it says, hard, whatever kind of behavior, whatever kind of activities are difficult, you should take, whether it mean taking the defeat, engaging, experiencing poverty or suffering or whatever, willingly. Langdu langwar ja. Dangdu langwar ja means to take up willingly. Dangdu means willingly. That means without kind of just being forced into it. That's kind of the crucial point here in engaging in that kind of activity. To willingly have this kind of state of mind, happily. That's the practice of the bodhisattva. So even if we can't practice this way now, if we could, knowing that this is the practice of the bodhisattvas, this is something that we can try to aim, to emulate. Right now, it's hard to like willingly experience our suffering. Like, Michael, you remember we were talking the other day. Right now, we've got suffering in our body. It's hard to. Our attitude now is one that wants to. The main thing is, let me get rid of this suffering, rather than recognizing it as something which is a karmic residue of past lives, and something that we can willingly experience and utilize for our own and others' welfare. Because our self-cherishing thought is a thought that immediately wants to have no headache, no suffering. When I have headache, I don't have that many headaches. Depends on the situation. Maybe certain circumstances when I don't get enough sleep or I don't get exercise, I'll get some kind of headaches. And one of the things I'll do sometimes is to take a pain reliever. What Lama Zopa Rinpoche suggests sometimes is, even we can't do Tonglen, we can't experience that suffering at first completely, and just willingly experiencing it for the welfare of others. At least do it halfway. Take half an aspirin and do half Tonglen. Do you understand what I mean? Take half an aspirin. So get rid of some of the suffering, and still with that suffering that still is there, imagine willingly experiencing that in order to eradicate the negative karma that one's created and for the welfare of others. So this becomes more clear in the succeeding verses, I think. Okay, is that helpful in that one? Is that a little bit clearer? So the next verse, 8th one, says, "May the suffering of all beings who, like myself, are driven by their karma and their habituation to the afflictions, be heaped upon me, the hedonist." Let's translate the hedonist. Sounds nice, huh? The hedonist, the desirer of happiness. So I think the translation is not bad. I would put it a little bit different order. It doesn't talk about, here it says, "May the suffering of all beings who, like myself, are driven by karma and their habituation." It sounds like what is driving one is two things, karma and habituation. But actually it reads differently. It means we are habituated with delusions and driven by our karma, or dragged by our karma. We're under the control. We're pulled by our karma. Often in the scriptures it talks about, because these two things, the afflictions and the karma, what are they talking about? Do you know, Elaine? Karma and afflictions, what comes to mind when you say karma and afflictions?
Well, your karma is the seeds that you planted as a result of the
Afflictions, right?
in the mind. previous moments of desire. And you create more.
Right? That's the habituation. But what this pair, karma and klesha, karma and delusions, where is it? What is it called? Venerable? What is it? Tell her.
Cause of suffering.
It's the cause of suffering. Let's see. So why those two things come together? Because as Venerable has mentioned, first thing that Buddha taught was, this is suffering. This is unsatisfactory. This is dukkha, this existence that we have, that we might think of as pretty neat. There are friends to have, and pleasures, and victories, and beauties to achieve, and so forth. But Buddha said all of this is ultimately dukkha, unsatisfactory, because it's not real happiness. And our attraction to that is what's preventing us from seeing the real happiness. And he said, what's the cause of that? Why does that arise? The origin of suffering, the second noble truth he said, was twofold: karma and klesha. Sometime in the Theravada tradition, they say the cause of suffering, or the origin of suffering, is what? Do you remember? No, they usually don't say ignorance, although theoretically they could. Famous thing they say is what? Desire, thirst. Tanha in Pali means thirst, kind of like wanting more. Wanting, the thirst for life, the thirst for pleasure. Ambition, basically, in various kinds. Not just positive ambition to achieve enlightenment, but ambition for worldly happiness. So in the Mahayana and in the extensive Hinayana teachings, it actually says the cause of suffering is twofold. What's the immediate cause of our suffering? Our karma. And what's the cause of the karma? Just as Elaine was saying, the cause of the karma is the afflictions. So if you look superficially, karma is the cause of our suffering. But more fundamentally, it's the afflictions that have caused the karma. Right? Make sense? I heard someone have some epiphany there. Aha. Was that you, Oma? Oh, that was Swirl. She had another epiphany. Okay. No epiphanies for Oma tonight. No, maybe before the evening's over you'll have one. Mm-hmm. You never know. So usually, like in the teachings, it often says, tossed, like in the Lama Chopa prayer, it says, tossed by the waves of karma, and afflicted by the watery denizens. It means that the monsters of the ocean here means cyclic existence. In cyclic existence, we're tossed by the waves of karma. Here it says moved, or what's the word they use here to translate this? Depa. Da is the word. Driven. Can be driven, could be moved or dragged or, forced by our karma, and the force of karma, or moved by the movement of that, and due to the familiarization with the afflictions, the klesha, we are, like all sentient beings, we're suffering. And may all of these sufferings, this is kind of continuation of verse 7, where it was introduced the idea of tonglen, of possibly utilizing everything that happens to us to get rid of these two, the demon and its attendant, whichever way you read it, the self-grasping and the self-cherishing thought. May the suffering of all beings be heaped upon me, the hedonist. What kind of sufferings? The sufferings of all beings who, like myself, are driven by their karma and afflicted and habituated with the afflictions. So somehow it almost sounds here, the way this is translated, it sounds like the word driven is modifying both of them, but it is not modifying both of those words. So this is one of the origins, this is one verse you could quote to explain where the idea of Tonglen comes from. There's actually sutras where the idea of Tonglen is actually mentioned, and in Nagarjuna's text and so forth. May the suffering of all beings be heaped upon me, the hedonist. So when we do Tonglen, it's not to make yourself miserable. The idea is not that Clayton become miserable or Jan become miserable, or I forgot, what's your name again?
Carl.
That Carl becomes miserable. What we actually, when we take the suffering, we're trying to experience it in such a way that the self-cherishing thought is the recipient of that. And that thought, that attitude that always wants us, one part of our mind is wise and is watching this and putting us in a situation that the self-cherishing thought finds very uncomfortable. That self-cherishing thought can be eroded over time. And one of the ways of doing that is willingly, with one part of your mind, taking on these sufferings, willingly accepting them, and in that way, because of the willingness and with a certain kind of mindset that sees the benefit of that, of by my doing this, others may benefit, and I can be eroding my self-cherishing thought. In that way, the self-cherishing thought can start to be diminished because of that. It can start to erode. The Hinayana Arhat doesn't think in that way.
What part does that?
So that would be an amalgam, a combination of wisdom and compassion that's motivating the individual to engage in this. Because especially the method to develop bodhicitta that we're talking about here is the method especially suited for those of sharper faculties. Remember we were talking in the first lecture? Of the two methods to develop bodhicitta, do you remember what they are? I forgot. What's your name in the back there? No, behind Bonnie. Mishko. Do you remember the two kinds of methods to develop bodhicitta? There's one that's suitable for those that are called followers of Dharma, and one suitable for... Oh, maybe that's not what you meant. Okay. There's something that the followers of reasoning and followers of faith. Followers of faith mainly practice the method of developing bodhicitta of the 7 methods of cause and effect. Understanding that all sentient beings have been your mother, and developing love through that means, right? Those who are followers of reasoning, who are of sharper faculties, what method do they use? Venerable, do you know? The equalizing and exchanging self and others, which this method of Tonglen is one of the elements in. It involves, first of all, recognizing it is possible to equalize your attitude of cherishing with others. Rather than you have all the cream cheesecake and others have none, that, I give Clayton half the cream cheesecake and then I take half. First step, equalizing. And then later exchanging the attitude so that I give Clayton all of the cream cheesecake. Do you like that, Clayton? He's ecstatic now. So that particular method of equalizing and exchanging self and others, the culmination of that meditation that's used is this meditation of Tonglen. It's more suitable for the individual of sharper faculties who already has an understanding of emptiness, because on the basis of that, they have the courage to engage in this. So with compassion and wisdom, that's how one would engage in this particular kind of meditation. May the suffering of all beings who, like myself, are driven by their karma and familiar with their delusions or afflictions, may all of that suffering be heaped upon me, the hedonist. I like that somewhere. Okay. The 9th verse says, when I become enmeshed in selfishness, I will offer my own happiness to living beings so as to counteract it. And here it says in the same way. It doesn't, in the Tibetan doesn't say in the same way. It's more like just as could one of my retinue or my companion, someone around me, be ungrateful to me, show ingratitude, it just is, in that case, how I could be content in knowing this is a retribution for my own lack of gratitude, my own inconstancy, it says. Okay, so this is beginning now to talk about, as throughout the text, this is coming to the point of explaining how we can apply this idea of Tonglen to all these different situations. When I become enmeshed in selfishness, so this is talking about when I notice either myself, the ego grasping, or self-cherishing thought becoming very prominent, and I'm thinking only of myself. When I notice that, I will offer my own happiness to living beings in order to counteract it. So whenever, to overcome or to act as an antidote to one way of thinking, it's very useful to act in exactly the opposite. Say, for instance, if you notice yourself being very miserly, as will be said later, as an antidote to that, one tries to apply just the opposite state of mind. One tries to be generous. So if you notice yourself in general being caught up in the self-cherishing or self-grasping, at that point, which is mainly thinking about your own happiness, so the self-cherishing thought. So in that circumstance, one tries to offer your own happiness to other sentient beings, at least mentally. And as a result of that, even if one is not very familiar with that kind of behavior, that starts to have some kind of outer manifestation. Maybe you smile more. And even though you don't do it authentically at first in trying to give happiness to others, even though it may not be from your heart, by getting familiar with that, it can become more authentic. That makes sense? When I become enmeshed in selfishness, I will offer my own happiness to living beings so as to counteract it. That means to counteract what? Selfishness, to overcome it as something the opposite. Just as, I would say, rather than in the same way, just as in the situation where one of our companions were to be ungrateful to me, even though I'd done much for them, I will be content, or I should be content, in knowing that this is the retribution for my own inconstancy in past lives, my own ingratitude in past lives. So it's kind of like recognizing when something happens that it has come about because of something similar that we've done in the past, right? When we experience other people's ingratitude, it's because we've been ungrateful to other beings in the past. What are you laughing about? When others don't appreciate us. What?
I was just thinking about my son.
Oh, he's not.
When I was a kid, he does the same thing.
There you go. Okay, that's good. Yeah. It's said that in general, the karma that we create this lifetime, in general, doesn't ripen this lifetime, right? But there's some circumstances. Depends on the heaviness of the karma. Some karma that we create can ripen this lifetime, that we create with respect to heavy objects, such as our parents. So if Swirl was ungrateful to her parents when she was a kid, maybe that's what's your son's name? Tidon. Tidon is maybe. This is the karmic retribution, the wheel of sharp weapons coming back, ripening even this lifetime. So that's fantastic. Could ripen even this lifetime.
I've just been doing it many lives.
Yeah, maybe many times. Yeah, right. So we're aghast when others aren't grateful for things that we've done for them. We're just, how could they? I've helped them so much, and they don't recognize what I've done for them. But this is a result, for the mind, instead of feeling resentment when they don't show us what we expect, the more positive thing, first of all, that creates negative karma, to feel resentment and to be, to act in some kind of snotty way back to them or whatever. What's a more politically correct way of saying snotty? So some bad way of acting is sort of, snobbish toward them because they're not respecting us. To recognize that this is the karmic retribution for what we've done in the past. We've done the same thing in the past. This is a retribution for my own not being constant, not being loyal and gratified with others' help. One of the verses that on the Tuesday night class, they've just gone through the 8 verses of training the mind. One of the verses was reminiscent of that. Do you remember? Which one? Were you here for that? When someone I have given great benefit.
To and place great hope and trust, treats mankind in unjust ways. I treat this person as my precious teacher.
May I see them as my precious teacher, my holy guru. When someone, the way I've memorized it, when someone I've benefited, and in whom I have great hopes, great expectations, because I've helped them so much. When that person gives me great harm, my expectation is I've done so much for them, I've taken care of them, I've raised them, whatever, helped them, and then they, instead of, profiting me, they actually harm me. They do, that I should practice to see them as my holy guru, because if you can see that person as your guru, you can see people to whom you haven't benefited and who, on the freeway, cut you off or hurt you or something like that. You can understand that this is you can understand that is the retribution of your past karma. If you can see it with a person that's so dynamic that you're really hoping, that you expect them to be nice to you, then it's easier in other circumstances. So we try to practice with the worst case scenario. Does it make sense? How are you feeling? Your knees are okay? Should we keep going? Or you need a break? What is that? Carl's head is kind of, I'm not sure if that's a yes or a no.
It's not a no.
It's not a no. Okay, let's take a real short break. Let's take just a 5-minute break, and then we'll just finish up a couple more verses. How's everyone doing? There, good. Oh, good. Thanks, Swirl. You dove under the thing there. Okay. So we're getting now into the first 6 verses were kind of like a general introduction to the subject, talking about how the bodhisattvas act in general and talking about the difference between self-grasping, self-cherishing, and so forth. Now the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th are talking about general about Tonglen, this general subject. And then then many of the verses after that will be using this refrain that will come in the 11th verse. So we just talked in 9, when I become enmeshed in selfishness, I'll do just the opposite. Whatever I notice my mind, whatever faults, I will try to, to engage in the opposite kind of behavior. When I notice some faulty behavior, try to act in the opposite. And here it says, just as, instead of says in the same way, jitar means just as, should a companion be ungrateful to me, I would be content in knowing this is the retribution for my own inconstancy. This is like the verse, all of these are similar to that verse in Lama Chopa that says, when the vessel world and the inhabitants therein are filled with the fruits of their past negative deeds. Do you know the verse I'm talking about? And unwished for suffering falls like rain. Sounds like now, doesn't it? Please grant me blessings to be able to transform these adverse conditions into the path. It needs to utilize what seems to be suffering as fuel for my path by seeing this as the exhausting of my negative karma. That's one way of approaching the subject. And that's what's talked about here. So just as I would be content, is that the word it said here? Content or... I would be content in knowing that this is the retribution for my own inconstancy. So how could you be content about that? Michael, could you be content in knowing this is the result of some negative karma we created in the past? At first, it doesn't seem like we could be content. So one has to meditate. How could one feel, like for instance, if your debt, even though your money is suddenly your money is gone out of your drawer, or you kept it in the socks or something like that in your shirts, and you said the money is gone, and you could be incredibly upset about that. But if you recognize that it had gone to paying your debts, the debt collector had come and taken it, and now your debt has gone down, at least you could be content about that.
It's funny you should ask that. Talking about Bonnie, about karma. I have a hard time with it because it seems like there's almost some magical, mysterious process in the sky, like this huge scorecard, and you get so many points, and if you don't get enough points, then you're born in the hell realm.
That's kind of that analogy we come up with, because in our Judeo-Christian tradition, perhaps, or Jewish tradition, there's the idea of, especially in the Christian tradition, who was it at the gates of heaven? Saint Peter, who you come up there and he's got this little scorecard, like it's probably on a PC now. He's got this scorecard. Michael, sorry, or Michael, come on in. You scored enough points. George, excuse me, go to the other place. Do not pass go. From Buddhist perspective, that's not the proper analogy. The proper analogy is that we have, it's a law of nature. Fire rises, heat rises in our atmosphere anyway, and a stone, objects fall due to gravity. One can try to explain why that happens. In fact, you can find some deeper physical explanations. But basically, in the end, even explaining those other laws, you have to say, that's the way it is. Electrical charges repel, or two bodies of mass attract one another, or whatever. So we come to a certain kind of acceptance of the laws of nature. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the same thing holds in the psychic realm. For every action that we engage in, through the agency of our body, speech, or mind, motivated by our mind, there's going to be a repercussion of that. So if we start to recognize that, and we'd like to have nice repercussions, we'd like to have nice things happen to us, we recognize I should create, even out of self-interest, I should create good things, and I should avoid creating negative things. And when negative things happen to us, bad things happen to us, suffering comes, loss comes, and so forth, that can be a reminder to us to get off our backside, and that we haven't yet eliminated all of the negative karma in our mind stream. And in so doing, there are various ways of utilizing that suffering. Because, of course, you might want to try to take the aspirin, as we said before, when you have a headache. But a skillful person would, once they were familiar with these meditation techniques and how beneficial they are, they would be content to still recognize, even if I put off that suffering by taking some medication, I've still got the cause of it. It's going to come back some other time. So let me experience it now with wisdom and compassion that can purify it much more thoroughly than in another time when I might be devoid of these opportunities to meditate, in which case it would only be totally oppressive. So we're in a very special situation now where we could, coming in contact with the spiritual teachings, where we can utilize all of these situations for our own benefit, for the benefit of others also. Okay, so let's go on a little bit further. 10th verse says, did I skip one? No, there's the next one. 10. When my body falls prey to terrible sickness, It is the weapon of my own evil deeds turned upon me for injuring the bodies of living beings. From now on, I shall take all sickness upon myself. Actually, this is the 10th verse is where this refrain begins. I'll read you how it was in the Dharamsala publication, that verse. When our bodies are aching and racked with great torment, of dreadful diseases we cannot endure. This is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. Till now we have injured the bodies of others. Hereafter let's take on what sickness is theirs. It's nice. Somehow the poetry is, even though it may not be always exactly literally correct. What do you think, Elaine? Sometimes this like chanting. Elaine has been working, and a lot of she and her companions have been very concerned with trying to get some of the prayers in chantable form of rituals that we do, and the incredible, sometimes incredibly great meaning, more feeling somehow when it's poetic and set into meter and so forth. But it's incredibly difficult to get the meaning and the meter and the poetry together. So that's something that we have to work at over time. It takes a lot of conscientiousness to work at that again and again to try to get it as close as possible. So when my body falls prey to terrible sickness, or our bodies are aching and racked with great torment, it is, here it says, the weapon of my own evil deeds turned upon me. The refrain in the other text here says, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning full circle upon us from wrongs we have done. So the idea here is trying to understand, whenever something happens, understanding that the root cause started with ourself, as though we threw out a boomerang, sharp weapon, the weapon that in Indian mythology was sometimes talked about. It's kind of like one of these, you see the Kung Fu movies, they have, maybe someone knows about that, these little circle with little throwing stars, kind of like that. What's it called? Shurikens, yeah. Is that the Indian word or is that the Chinese one? I'm not sure. You're not shirkin. I'm sorry, you're not sure. So something like that you throw it out to harm others, and for your own welfare, and somehow over the course of time it comes back to you, kind of like boomerang. So this is the kind of idea of our afflictions, our ego grasping and self-cherishing have created actions in the past, which we might have thought as, getting rid of the enemy, getting what we wanted. But eventually that will come back to us. The wheel of sharp weapons will come back to us. So somehow that's kind of the flavor of that. It is the weapon of my own evil deeds turned upon me, returning to me, for injuring the bodies of living beings, of others. From now on, I shall take all sickness upon myself. Or hereafter, let's take on what sickness is theirs. So, this is talking about trying to get familiar with many different aspects to understand, to be able to practice Tonglen like this. To be familiar with karma, because whenever we experience anything, the only way we can experience anything, happiness or suffering within cyclic existence, is if we've created the karma for it in the past. There's no way we can experience anything without having created the karma. Yes?
I just have a question about Tonglen with a headache. So let's say you have a headache. I've had people say to me, well, yes, I have a headache, and I'm going to take some aspirin because I have the karma to have the headache, but I also have the karma to be born at a time where I have some antidote, and I can take this.
Right.
And so I can also take this aspirin with a mind that says, by my taking this aspirin, may it also relieve all the headaches of all the things in the universe. So I wonder about that, too.
That sounds interesting, yeah. By my taking this aspirin, they eliminate all the suffering of all suffering. Not sure about that particular, how strong that would be. The idea of willingly, because there are going to be situations a lot of times when we don't have any way of overcoming the suffering.
Right.
And to get familiar and acceding to that self-cherishing thought that wants myself to be free of that immediately is not going to be necessarily benefiting oneself. Say, for instance, if you've got an important task to do for others, you're making resources to benefit the center, and you've got a headache one day, and you know that you're not going to be able to do a good job and make resources. You have to give a presentation or something. In a situation like that, for the welfare of others, one might do that to eliminate that hindrance at that point. But recognizing you're losing an opportunity of actually purifying that negative karma, because indeed you can. Perhaps we have certain situations now, due to our technology and so forth, where we can prevent certain suffering from ripening.
So then is it better to say to someone, you should, listen, have that headache?
Well, this is what Lama Zopa, remember what...
Transforming it for the benefit of others. Or is it better to say, here's some Advil. Take away their pain.
Tylenol.
People have said, well, they have the karma. I say, well, they created the cause to experience that result.
Right.
They say, yeah, but you can help them. You can change that.
Right. Well, this is one of the big things that one has to investigate. That's why in trying to help sentient beings, you need not only good intention, you need wisdom to know the effect. Say you see a person who is suffering, they're on their deathbed or in their last days, and one says, "Oh, let's put them out of their misery." This word about when a horse or a dog is sick and someone's, let's put it out of its misery. To me, that brings, I don't know, somehow, I'm not a good person, but somehow I find that sort of really so contradictory. Putting it out of its misery, it's alive. It doesn't have to be miserable. You can, the horse can, and the cow, whatever. It doesn't have to be miserable. But sometimes it's putting ourselves out of our misery. But say, for instance, one really had a beneficial intention. Say that the other person is dying. With good motivation, one creates a certain amount of good karma, with beneficial intention. But you don't know the effect of that. It may be that by that person experiencing one more day of suffering, that the karma to be born in the hell realms will be exhausted by that. So unless you know that kind of thing, it's very dangerous to be able to, to just, blithely make that kind of decision with self-confidence.
I can see that when it comes to taking a life, but when it comes to trying to help relieve someone's pain, I don't know. It feels like...
Right, well, this is why our teachers, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, other lamas, sometimes we go to them for some solution of some problem, and they give us some task to do, and it turns out even more problematic, right? And we might think, oh, they got it wrong. I've lost faith in you completely. Have you ever had that experience? Maybe not. Maybe some people have. You know what I'm talking about. You haven't. And that's a situation where I think the person, maybe the teacher is actually giving us an opportunity to even purify something. They put us in this, we think, oh, please, what can I do, for you, Lama? And they send us some distant place where our mind goes crazy with desire or loneliness, or, there's all sorts of problems. And we think, why did they send me here? Why did Lama send me here? Because maybe that was an opportunity for us to purify something. And there's greater benefit in the long distance, in the long term. When Rinpoche, Lama Zopa Rinpoche makes a divination, always checks two things, the short-term and the long-term benefit. The best is when both turn out beneficial. There'll be a benefit for immediately and in the long term, and both for the person themselves and for the community that they're engaging in. Certain bodhisattvas, certain person that's very courageous, even if it was detrimental for them, they'd be happy to engage in something if it was more beneficial for the community. At our point now, we wouldn't want to. We're just beginners. We're just baby bodhisattvas, or aspiring bodhisattvas. So we'd want the best. We'd want ourselves to profit and maybe to make some benefit to others, but mainly ourselves to profit, right? Whereas later, the bodhisattva would be able, like the peacock, would be able to, even in a situation that was seemingly poisonous, would be able to utilize that to make themselves even more glorious. We're not to that point yet, but you're getting the idea, right? We're starting to see. So I think Rinpoche's advice about taking half an aspirin would be a good advice, to at least leave the seed in someone's mind that there is something, even though you have the technological ability to alleviate the suffering, seemingly that doesn't eliminate it from the root at all. All you're doing is putting it off. That suffering is going to come back some other time. It's like you've deflected the wheel of sharp weapons. It's going to just circle around and come back in another lifetime, maybe in the hell realms when you have no way of purifying it.
So you recommend not taking...
No, I recommend half an aspirin. Middle way. Eventually, no aspirin.
I asked the same question of the Tibetan doctor when he was here.
Mm-hmm.
I said, if by taking medicine I'm getting rid of, I'm not causing the suffering that would be exhausting my karma, why should I take medicine?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you
Yeah.
medicine? And his answer was something like, when the sickness becomes a detriment to your precious human life and prevents you from practicing the Dharma that is the true remedy, then it becomes an obstacle and a problem, and you should treat it. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that you should eliminate all the suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a degree at which you need to, and when it becomes beneficial or not beneficial.
I think that's very good. I think that's what when I was saying, for instance, if Elaine had some job to do in cyclic existence, she was benefiting sentient beings, and some sickness was preventing her from engaging in that, then taking medicine for the greater benefit, even though you know that that's not, you've still got karma that's got to be ripening, but for the benefit, of keeping this body healthy, this vessel that's going to help take you and other sentient beings across the ocean of samsara, to keep, you patch up the boat. You don't just kick it around and treat it with, disrespect, because it's something that is of value to take you and other sentient beings across the ocean of samsara. So let's mention one or two more here. The 11th verse says, "When my mind falls prey to suffering, it is surely the weapon of my own evil deeds turned upon me for troubling the minds of others. Now, or from now on, I shall willingly take all suffering upon myself." Another translation, "Depressed and forlorn when we feel mental anguish, this is the wheel of sharp weapons returning, full circle upon us from what wrongs we have done. Till now we have deeply disturbed minds of others. Hereafter let's take on this suffering ourselves." So that means, again, willingly, when, one of the things we all experience are periods of depression, sadness, that can be manifested because of sickness or because of being criticized or lonely or just, who knows, just a general feeling of malaise. Recognizing this is the karmic result, you could say retribution or return, of the deeds that we've done. We've caused other people's minds to be unhappy, especially our gurus in the past, our spiritual teachers, our parents, other people in other lifetimes. Those are the strongest, the karma that we create with respect to the gurus, the Buddhas, and our parents and so forth are heavier than other things, people that have been especially kind to us. So it's not surprising, while we're in cyclic existence, we've created numberless karmic deeds like this, that we're going to experience some kind of results like that, rather than feeling, I shouldn't have this. Recognizing this is the nature of cyclic existence, and at first being equanimous, just to recognize I can just bear this with a certain amount of patience for the welfare of my own liberation and the welfare of others, and later, as here, to actually utilize it, thinking, being glad, willingly accepting this, taking this on happily. That's incredible if you can start to have that kind of state of mind. Like the courageous mother or father who willingly takes on the suffering of going out in the snow and getting the wood and, working and so forth for the kids, for the family, for others, or for the village, or willingly taking on suffering. It takes a certain amount of courage to be able to do that, and compassion, love and compassion. So what we're trying to do here is to see, not only to have an equanimous mind, that's a good step at first, not to react with anger, to see the benefits of this, first of all for oneself. This is the exhaustion of one's negative karma. And then to even go beyond that, to recognize this as an antidote to one's own self-cherishing, by willingly taking this on and letting it marinate there with the self-cherishing thought. Letting the self-cherishing thought have to experience that ignominy or that depression or suffering, because it's the one that threw out that sharp wheel that's coming back. When my mind falls prey to suffering, here it means when my mind is unhappy, or when I'm unhappy. Rangi semla dugnel jungwe se, at the time of unhappiness, of my unhappiness arising. Semla dugnel means suffering in the mind, which we call unhappiness. When the mind is unhappy, when my mind is unhappy, it is surely, definitely, Nepal in Tibetan, the weapon, the wheel of sharp weapons of my own evil deeds turned upon me for troubling the minds of others. So my mental unhappiness is due to causing the unhappiness of others. This is one of the things in modern psychology, isn't it? That there's a certain kind of depression that arises without any apparent outer cause. Have you heard about this? And from a Buddhist point of view, definitely there's a cause. Even though it's maybe not immediately apparent, we've created the karma in the past of troubling other people's minds, making others unhappy. So, also, when you experience something like that, when you know what that is like, that gives you an opportunity of feeling empathy for others when others are depressed. You can say, by my experiencing this, may I understand also how others feel when they are criticized, when they hear harsh words. That can help you then to prevent yourself from engaging in those activities that harm others in the future, because you know what that feels like. You're hesitant to say harsh words, or at least there's a certain break, certain holding back rather than engaging in negative activities with gusto. Do you remember that there was some years ago, there was a commercial for Schlitz beer. I don't know when, it must have been in the States at some time, or maybe I was in Singapore or something. I can't remember. It must have been in the States. Do you remember Schlitz beer? Yeah, there was a series of maybe about a year. There was some commercial about life is short. You've got to grab all the gusto you can. Do you remember that? And one of the commercials that completely drove me crazy, there was this guy, kind of looked like rich guy on his big yacht, and a bunch of scantily clad members of the opposite sex there, and they were and you have to completely mindless, and he was drinking. And then you have to grab as much gusto as you can. From a Buddhist perspective, we do live life only once in a long time. We only have a human life once in a long period of time. But the point is, you have to learn what is real gusto, what is the real essence, and what is going to be useless. Just striving after the big yacht and the pretty companions and the pleasures of the senses and intoxication, all of that never really brings satisfaction. The people who engage in it, if you've ever engaged in those things for some period of time, it's not really satisfying. You might feel yourself superior, better than others, because others are envious of you, but it's not really satisfying. And of course, we have to leave it behind.
But how is that, in a sense, different than when you're manifesting yourself as a tantric deity and they see all these little females around them and everything, and they melt out?
Oh, it's completely different. It's completely different because when, like the bodhisattva, like the peacock, who's able to use, this is the point of the first verses, the peacock is able to use the poison that destroys others. A person who's actually qualified to practice Tantra is able to use desire to enhance their spiritual practice. Right now, without renunciation, without bodhicitta, without an understanding of emptiness, we would be like the the dog going in and trying to eat the lion food, or trying to emulate the big animal, or trying to emulate the peacock and dying as a result of it. We would be destroyed by trying to emulate that kind of behavior right now. So that's why it's very dangerous until we've reached the right stage. So there's a famous verse that Atisha mentioned when he came to Tibet. I don't know if it was his own composition. It probably comes from the sutras I've mentioned before. Life is very short. The objects of knowledge are infinite. Therefore, you should be like the swan. And the proverbial swan can take, you pour milk into water, you offer it a bowl full of watered down milk, and it can take the essence out of that and let the water drip out of the holes of its beak. So be like the swan and take the essence of this life, and don't be distracted by the meaningless affairs of this life. The so-called gusto of the Schlitz commercial. Let that go and take the essence. That's the real gusto. Because life is short. There's numberless things to know. You could become famous, you could become beautiful, you could become Olympic champion, you could become scholar, the richest person in the world. All of those things from a Buddhist perspective, from a real spiritual perspective, are not anything to hoot about. We've had them numberless times and they haven't helped us. Numberless times you've had the best flavors, the best tastes, the best mind, the most beautiful body, you've been the most powerful person, the richest person. We've had that numberless times and we're still not satisfied. If it were really satisfying to get those things, we wouldn't be still striving after them. So I'll just introduce the next one and then we'll do a little meditation. When I am tormented. Oh no, which one am I on? 11. Am I on 12? When I am tormented by extreme hunger and thirst, it is the weapon of my own evil deeds turned upon me for swindling, stealing, and acting miserly. From now on, I shall willingly take all hunger and thirst upon myself. Again, willingly, when it says I shall willingly, or I shall take, it's always this idea of, with wisdom, putting it on the self-cherishing thought, willingly, seeing it as a possibility to benefit us spiritually. I shall willingly take all hunger and thirst upon myself. We'll talk about this again next time, but sometimes in the evening or other times, you can't get, you're hungry or whatever. This is indeed the karmic result of our self not having or taking the resources of others in the past. So, in a situation like that, to recognize this is one of the causes of our perpetually being born in the Preta realm, is our miserliness about food and about resources, about love and companionship and so forth, always wanting. Then it creates the karma of not having in the future. So when we experience a period of not having, whether it be thirst or hunger, or not having companionship and so forth, it's because of having stealing, swindling. In this case, when we talk about using the resources of others, acting miserly, not giving in the past, not giving love, not giving food and so forth. One of the very special ways of purifying that kind of negative karma with respect to food is to engage in the nyungne, the fasting puja in connection with Avalokiteshvara. So we'll talk about that a little bit more next time. Let's, anyone have a question before we do final dedication? Do you have a question? Yeah.
So my question is about karma. My understanding is that karma multiplies with time. And so, for example, the karma of doing something small, like killing an insect, on the second day, this multiplies into the karma of killing a larger being, and then within a week, this karma is multiplied to a larger extent, etc. So in some relatively short period of time, the karma has become immense. So I think of all the deeds that we do, positive and negative, multiplying and becoming these enormous karmic things, that are either great or horrible. So I wonder why every day that we're walking along, we are either being crushed by a Volkswagen or having, pots of gold fall at our feet. Where did the little problems and good things come from?
Maybe we experienced, when we're born in the hell realms and the animal realm and the Preta realm, maybe a lot of that heavy stuff, the big ones, are, the first things. They're ready to ripen. Those sprouts that are ready, closest to ripening, that heaviest and closest to ripening and so forth, those are experienced first. So they're kind of, in a way, you might say that we're purified a little of those. When after a long period of time, some little sprout of virtue that we created to be born a human has become the biggest, then we're born as a human, and in this lifetime, the conditions may not be ready for all of those some other negative karmas to ripen. It may be that we have the karma to be born as a dinosaur or to be killed, and by a certain kind of behavior, we can prevent that from ripening. A lot of people do experience a lot of hardship, even as a human. And look at Iraqis being bombed, and our own soldiers being killed, and Israelis and Palestinians and other people having, even as a human, at one moment, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, who would have thought 3 years from now there would be a deficit and all of this. We were talking about the budget being not only balanced but having, what's the opposite of deficit? Surplus, and things getting better and planning and everyone's happy. And then 3 years later, there's all this calamity arising. So things change. It depends on the karma. And what the negative karma that we create this lifetime, these little things that are increasing, they will ripen in future lifetimes. That's why it's very important to try to do the best that we can to try to purify them as much as possible, to prevent them from multiplying. That's why we say bodhisattva mantra every day, to help them from multiplying, help them from multiplying, prevent them from multiplying. And to actually try to engage in not just preventing them from multiplying, but actually to diminish them. At least reciting 21 times is said to help to prevent the negative karmas of breaking the vows and so forth from multiplying. And then if you recite more, it can help to purify them. But yeah, it's like, right, why aren't we crushed constantly why aren't there boulders falling on us all the time? Because certainly, maybe in our previous life, we've experienced a lot of that. Heavy negative karmas. We've been in the lower realms for a long time. Okay, let's spend a couple of minutes meditating and dedicating the merit. So see if you can recall the calm state of mind that we had at the beginning with effort, that we developed through effort. Watching the clarity of the mind. Bringing your attention away from your eyes, your body, to your heart. Not getting caught up in any of the appearances that might be very tempting or just compelling, but immediately letting go and trying to see the spaciousness of the mind, the substratum of the mind within which they're arising. And recognizing that we've created virtuous karma tonight and in the past, even karma that we've created in other lifetimes that's not yet ripened, we can dedicate all of this virtue, which is the act of aspiring that this karma not ripen in a mindless way, in just whatever way it might, in a way that perhaps would bring us some relief in cyclic existence, but not necessarily benefit us spiritually. But may it ripen in such a way that our spiritual practice is enhanced, that sentient beings are benefited. May this karma ripen in such a way that we quickly achieve enlightenment as a result of this, for the welfare of all living beings. Especially now at this time when there's so much craziness around us. Thinking subsidiary dedication. We can dedicate the same merit. You might say, I already dedicated. How can I dedicate again? We can dedicate again and again. Due to this karma, may the minds of sentient beings that are intent on violence and retribution, ego, defensiveness, may they all be calmed as a result of this. And may again, even at this last moment, may wisdom and compassion prevail, and again usher in a period of peace and tranquility where people can practice spirituality in a very positive way as a result of this merit. So if you have a chance next time, we got up through verse, 12? 12. Maybe to try to get up to around verse 20, or, in the next page, 17, 18.